I found out my family's fortune was built on a lie. I took it all back. Let's start with this. I was never supposed to have money, not the kind of money my uncle rolled around in. I grew up in a two-bedroom apartment in Cleveland with my mom, who worked nights cleaning hotel rooms. My dad bailed when I was 5. My only connection to the rich side of the family came in the form of awkward Christmas cards and the occasional second-hand suit mailed to me with the tag still on. My uncle, Charles Kensington, was a legend in the family. Real estate tycoon, investor, alleged philanthropist. He made his millions flipping commercial properties in the early 2000s and parlayed that into a lifestyle of black tie galas and country club memberships. He was also a complete ghost to us. So when I got a call from his lawyer inviting me to a family inheritance dinner, I assumed they meant to call someone else. I almost deleted the voicemail, but the curiosity, it sank its hooks in me. I arrived at the old Kensington estate in the suburbs on a rainy Friday evening, feeling wildly out of place in my Target blazer. The driveway alone could fit 3 of our apartment buildings. The butler, yes, a real one, opened the door like I was expected. "You must be Mr. Nathaniel Gray," he said. "Just Nate," I replied. He gave a slight polite smile like, "Oh, you're one of those." The house looked like the inside of a museum. Gilded mirrors, chandeliers, portraits of grim ancestors staring down from the walls like they were judging me already. Everyone was already there, my cousins, whom I hadn't seen since I was a teenager. My mother's sister, Aunt Regina, wearing so many pearls it looked like she'd bred an oyster farm, and at the head of the table, a seat left empty, for Uncle Charles. He had died a week earlier, apparently. Massive stroke in his sleep, 76 years old. I sat at the very end of the long dining table, surrounded by people who had no clue who I was. They whispered behind wine glasses and stared with thin smiles. I felt like a party crasher at my own funeral.
Then the lawyer stood and tapped a fork against his glass. "Ladies and gentlemen, as executor of Mr. Charles Kensington's estate, I thank you for coming. Before dessert, I will be reading a statement prepared by Mr. Kensington detailing the distribution of his assets." Aunt Regina cleared her throat in anticipation. My cousin Philip adjusted his tie. People straightened up like they were in church. The lawyer pulled a thick, cream-colored envelope from his briefcase, slid out a letter, then he read. "To my beloved family," the letter began. "If you're hearing this, it means I'm finally dead. Congratulations. No more waiting." People chuckled nervously. "I know many of you are here expecting a payout. Maybe you think you earned it by being born into the right name or by pretending to care about me in my last years. Maybe some of you think you deserve it just because you suffered me, but only one of you deserves the truth." The room went still. "To my nephew, Nathaniel Gray, yes, the son of my black sheep sister, the one I alienated and ignored, I leave the entire estate." Gasps, whispers. Aunt Regina's wineglass shattered against the floor. I sat frozen. "All properties, accounts, and investments totaling $38 million are now his. Because he, unlike the rest of you, didn't come with a handout, and because the truth belongs to him." I couldn't breathe. I wasn't sure if it was the money or the word truth that made me feel like I'd just swallowed a bomb. The next morning, I woke up in a silk-sheeted guest room the size of my entire apartment, still stunned from the night before. Uncle Charles had left me everything. Everything. The family was in shock, and the only one who hadn't tried to make polite conversation after the will reading was Aunt Regina, who stormed out before dessert with my cousin Philip following like a lapdog. I expected someone, maybe the lawyer, to come back and tell me it was all a mistake, that they'd misread the name or that it was a prank. But instead, I was handed a folder with a detailed inventory of the estate, stocks, bonds, properties, offshore accounts, and one line that stood out. Vault room, sublevel, access code 1905. "Vault room?" I asked the lawyer. He gave me a tight smile. "Your uncle was fond of secrets.
The housekeeper showed me the way, down a hidden staircase, behind a grandfather clock that looked like it belonged in a Scooby-Doo episode. We descended into a narrow stone hallway that smelled like old books and something metallic. At the end was a door the size of a bank safe, complete with a keypad and thick iron bolts. I entered the code, 1905. The door creaked open. Inside, the walls were lined with filing cabinets, safes, and security monitors. It was like a bunker for paranoia. A large oak desk sat in the center, covered in papers, old photos, and a single black binder with my name on it. I opened it. Inside were photographs of my mother, dozens, some from when she was a teenager, others from before I was born. Most of them I'd never seen in my life. Tucked into the binder was a handwritten note. Your mother was smarter than any of them gave her credit for. I took everything from her. You deserve to know why. My hands shook as I turned the pages. It was all there. Contracts, land deeds, correspondence. My uncle hadn't built his fortune from scratch like the family legend said. He stole it from my mother.
And then he'd cut her out completely.
Back in the early 90s,
She
my
tried to fight it
grandfather
in
had
court,
left the
but
family property
Charles had
and
better
business
lawyers,
in equal
more
shares
money,
to his
and
children,
no
Charles
soul.
and my
She
mom,
lost everything.
Laura. But Charles,
That's when we
ever the
moved to
charmer,
Cleveland.
had
That's
convinced
when the
my
family
mother to
stopped
sign
calling,
away her
when we
half
started
for
from
a
scratch.
temporary restructuring.
My mother
She'd
never
done it
told
out
me.
of trust,
Not once.
out of love for
Not
her
even
brother.
when we were behind on rent or living on ramen noodles. She never told me she was supposed to be rich. I walked out of the vault with a storm behind my eyes. Back in the main house, Aunt Regina and Philip were waiting in the study. Regina looked like she was trying to pretend she hadn't spent the morning crying. Philip looked smug. "We need to talk," she said. "Charles was a complicated man, Nathaniel." "Was he?" She crossed her legs too calmly. "We all played our part. Your mother, God rest her, knew what she was doing when she walked away. She didn't want this life." "That's not what the documents say." Philip smirked. "You found the vault, huh?" I stared at him. "You knew?" He nodded. "Everyone did. You think we stuck around because we liked him? No. We stayed because of what was down there, because we thought he'd finally make it right." "Make it right?" I snapped. "He ruined her." "She was weak," Regina hissed. "She didn't have the stomach for this world, but maybe you do." She leaned in, eyes gleaming. "We can make you more powerful than you ever imagined, Nate. 38 million is nothing compared to what we can do together. You just have to play the game, like Charles did." And just like that, I saw it for what it was. This family didn't want to share. They wanted to absorb me, mold me, control me, just like they did my mother. That night, I sat alone in the study with a glass of the good scotch, something I'd never tasted before but now apparently owned in barrels. I looked around at the portraits, at the luxury, and I didn't feel victorious. I felt haunted. My mom had died 2 years ago, never got a penny, never got justice. But I could fix that. I picked up the phone and called my lawyer. "I want to liquidate it, all of it, every property, every asset." He paused. "All of it?" "Yes. And what would you like to do with the money?" "I want to build something real, in her name." When I saw the house, I knew he'd gone too far. A sleek, modern mansion tucked into the hills just north of the city. Glass walls, infinity pool, 4-car garage. The kind of place you don't just fall into without some serious financial fuel. And let me remind you, our parents were broke. I worked my ass off just to pay off their debts, and Mark had always been charming, the type who could sell sand in the desert, but not this rich. I sat outside in a rental car that I'd paid cash for. I didn't want a single digital trail. I'd been digging into him for 3 months, slowly peeling back the shell of lies he'd built around himself. Offshore accounts, fake foundations, misappropriated trust funds from our grandfather's estate that I'd thought were long depleted. Turns out, Grandpa left more than just a crusty toolbox and a shotgun. He left $2.7 million tucked into an untouched account in the Cayman Islands. meant to be split between us after our father's passing. And Mark? He found it before I did. Transferred every cent into shell companies in Belize and Luxembourg, all wrapped under his name. It was time to make my move. I started by going after the one thing he couldn't resist: recognition. I leaked a fake Forbes interview featuring Mark Teller, self-made philanthropist, and watched as he scrambled to contact them. My article claimed he planned to launch a tech incubator for underprivileged youth. Of course, none of that was true, but it was exactly the kind of ego-stroking nonsense Mark lived for. The next week, he hosted a gala to announce his humanitarian fund. The media showed up, influencers, even a couple of minor celebs. It was a scene, and I made sure I was there too, tucked in the shadows, watching him glow under the lights like some kind of messiah. I wore a cheap wig and black-framed glasses. No one recognized me, except for Emily. Yeah, Emily, Mark's ex, my ex-best friend, the one he dumped after his stock crashed and she realized her diamond ring was cubic zirconia. Emily brushed past me, did a double take, and mouthed, "Is that you?" I nodded. She didn't say anything, just handed me a napkin with her number on it and vanished into the crowd. 2 days later, she was at my place with a bottle of wine and a folder full of screenshots, texts from Mark, emails, bank transfers, promises, lies. I had more than enough evidence to roast him publicly. But this wasn't about headlines anymore. This was personal. He'd stolen from me, from our family, from the legacy my grandfather tried to leave us. I didn't want justice. I wanted everything. Phase 2 was simple. Take over his money before he realized it was missing.
I posed as one of her shell company accountants, thanks to a friend who knew a guy, and started sending requests for fund transfers. Most of his companies were so sloppily registered that no one even questioned the paperwork. I diverted $400,000 into a dummy account. No alarms. I smiled. He was so wrapped up in his own legend that he hadn't even noticed his castle was sinking. Emily, meanwhile, fed me the juicy gossip. Mark had hired a private chef, a personal trainer, and a spiritual coach named Rio, who charged $12,000 a month to balance his energy. The coach had a man bun, a closet full of white linen pants, and exactly 0 credentials. I met him once at a brunch event. He gave me a crystal and told me my aura was disturbed. I almost punched him. Instead, I smiled, took the crystal, and made a mental note to wiretap Mark's penthouse for audio. Don't worry, I had connections. The audio files started rolling in 2 weeks later. Most of it was boring. Mark bragging, Rio humming, the chef complaining about keto diets. But then came the conversation that changed everything. Mark to Rio. "She'll never find out. The will was sealed. I got to it before the lawyer ever called her. She thinks Grandpa left us both the same thing. Joke's on her, he hated her guts." Rio. "So what? You just forged the documents?" Mark. "I paid the clerk, a little bleach and a new signature. She didn't even question it. Dumb bitch." I hit pause. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. He'd forged the will. I hadn't just been excluded, I'd been erased. My name was on the original, but he had bribed someone to change it. And he did it right after our dad died, when I was still grieving and barely able to function. I should have felt crushed, but I felt fire. Emily and I met again the next day. "Let's ruin him," she said, no preamble. "Oh, honey," I replied. "That's the plan." We spent the next month setting the stage. I leaked parts of the audio, just enough to make some of Mark's investors nervous. I sent anonymous complaints to the IRS. I filed a Freedom of Information Act request to dig into the forged will. I even hired a forensic analyst to compare the handwriting on the revised document to Grandpa's real signature. It wasn't even close. My final move? I impersonated a luxury property buyer with some makeup, a French accent, and a fake LinkedIn profile. I met with Mark's realtor and put in a discreet offer on his mansion. He was swimming in debt by then. Turns out he'd spent through most of the money, and he jumped at the chance. When the offer went through, he danced on Instagram,
wrote some long-winded caption about leveling up. 2 weeks later, he was served with charges for wire fraud, identity theft, tax evasion, and falsification of a legal will. And when he asked who turned him in, I sent him a postcard. It said, "You shouldn't have underestimated the quiet sibling." He's currently serving 7 years in a federal correctional facility in Arizona. As for me, I inherited the rest of the estate thanks to the will being overturned. The house sold. The funds redirected. The lies all unraveled. And Emily? We're not best friends again, but we talk. Occasionally. She's dating a nurse now. Good guy, stable, nothing like Mark. I took a year off after it all ended, traveled a bit, wrote a book, titled it The Golden Brother. It hit number 3 on the nonfiction bestseller list. My publisher wants to adapt it into a miniseries. Sometimes revenge is a dish best served with royalties. And sometimes the long game pays off. Big. So, there I was, sitting across from my mother, the woman who taught me how to count using $100 bills, who wore Chanel like pajamas and poured scotch into her morning coffee like it was syrup. She looked older now, not in a wrinkled way, just tired, like decades of being at the top of the food chain had finally made her realize how lonely it was. "You really want to do this, Aaron?" she asked, voice low, eyes unblinking. I didn't flinch. "I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing this because you destroyed everything good in this family." She sighed, leaned back in the chair. The silence stretched like a taut wire. It had taken me over 2 years to gather the evidence. I wasn't just planning a hostile takeover of the family's empire. I was pulling the rug out from under her, one Swiss account at a time. The day my brother Danny died, and she acted like it was an inconvenience to her gala planning, something inside me broke, and that fracture grew into fire. "I suppose you have something to show me?" she said finally. I slid a folder across the table. Inside, documents, emails, photos, records showing how she'd siphoned millions from the charity arm of the family's foundation. How she'd used shell companies to buy up slums and jack the rent, evicting families without notice. I even had a voice recording, her arranging an off-the-books restructuring of one of our warehouses where a fire killed 2 night workers. No insurance, no compensation to the families, just buried like dust under marble. She didn't look at the papers, just closed the folder. "I underestimated you," she said. That scared me more than if she'd screamed. Let me rewind a little. After Danny died, I learned that he'd been investigating her, quietly, on his own. He was always the ideal son, clean, obedient, well-groomed, so no one suspected he'd grown a conscience, but he had. And before his accident, he left me clues, hidden inside a hollowed-out first edition of The Great Gatsby in his apartment, was a USB drive, password protected. And the password? The date of our first ever sleepover in his treehouse when we were kids. I opened it. My world shifted. Tax documents, bank transfers, internal memos, even security footage. Danny was building a case, not just against our mother, but against the entire board of the Thornton Trust. She had called it a car crash, and it was, but the brakes had been tampered with. I never proved she did it, but come on. Over the next 18 months, I cleaned up my act, got sober, clean-shaven, enrolled in night school for forensic accounting. I played the obedient son, climbing ranks in the family business, from PR puppet to junior VP of finance. She thought she had me under control, but while she sent me to observe board meetings, I was recording them. When she sent me to audit our philanthropic branches, I was creating paper trails, ones I could trace back to her. It wasn't easy. The higher I climbed, the more I became like her, cold, calculating, ruthless. I lied to my fiancé, to my friends, to myself. But then I met Gloria. Gloria was a lawyer, originally hired to assist with some minor dispute over a luxury condo development. She saw through me in 3 seconds. "You're not like them," she said the first time we had dinner. "I am," I replied. "I'm just better at hiding it." She didn't laugh. She challenged me in ways I hated and needed. Eventually, I told her everything, about Danny, about my mother, about the plan. She said she wanted in. We became partners, in business and in bed. She helped clean the legal side, used her connections in government to verify the tax fraud. She even got a few ex-board members to flip. And just like that, the walls started closing in on Mom. Back to that day. She looked me dead in the eyes. "What do you want, Aaron?" I knew she was asking whether I wanted her resignation, her exile, or something worse. So I told her the truth. "I want you to admit it, that you chose money over Danny, over Dad, over everything." She smiled, thin and tight. "You think I didn't love your father? He was going to expose you. He had an envelope, remember that?" She blinked. That caught her off guard. "I found it," I said. Inside that envelope, hidden for years inside a locker at the country club, were notes he'd written, plans to go public with evidence of misuse of funds, worker exploitation, illegal dumping contracts. He'd written a letter to me and Danny, saying he was sorry for letting it go so far. That letter never got mailed, because he died of a stroke before he could. "I don't have proof," I said, "but I know what you did." She didn't deny it. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a checkbook, scribbled something, tore it off. "Here," she said, 10 million. Walk away. Start a new life. Burn the folder." I stared at it and laughed. 10 million? You think this is about money? It's always about money. No, I said. It's about power. The next week, the story hit the papers. Philanthropy empire faces fraud allegations. Whistleblower inside Thornton Trust exposes massive corruption. She tried to fight it, called in favors, threatened to sue. But Gloria was already 10 steps ahead. We had immunity deals, sealed depositions, and enough support from outside investors to stage a full board takeover. She was ousted. The board was dissolved, restructured. Gloria became interim CEO. And me? I didn't take the job. I disappeared for a while, backpacked through Europe, no phones, just books and trains and hostels, with people who didn't care about bloodlines. But money still found me. I got a call from a man I'd never met, one of the original founders of the trust. He said he admired what I did, said he wanted me to manage a new fund, one that actually helped people. I accepted. Not because I wanted power, but because I wanted to build something honest, for once. A year later, Gloria and I sat on the beach in Costa Rica. She was pregnant. I was reading to the baby. Yes, The Great Gatsby. Some habits die hard. She asked me what I'd do if our kid grew up to hate everything we stood for. I said, "Then I hope they're better than we were." Epilogue. I got a letter the other day. No return address, just a wax seal. Inside, a photo of my mother, somewhere in the Alps, smiling, peaceful, with a note in her handwriting. "You won, Aaron. But we both know that cost more than either of us could afford. I only hope your child never sees what power does to a family." I burned the photo, but I kept the note, not as a threat, as a reminder. Money built this family. Power destroyed it. And I was the bridge between the two. I stood in my father's old study, alone, just as I had found it after his passing. The sun poured in through the bay windows, lighting up the rows of leather-bound books and dusty ledgers. His desk was still immaculate, untouched since the day he left it for the last time. It felt like a museum, an exhibit of a man who wielded money like a sword and shield until it ultimately turned on him. In his will, he left me one thing, a sealed envelope with a single instruction, to be opened after you've let go of the anger. I held on to that envelope for over a year. Every time I moved, it came with me, shoved in the bottom of a drawer or tucked inside a shoebox. I never felt ready. How could I let go of the rage I carried for everything he'd done? To me, to our family, to the people he stepped on. But something changed after I became a father. The day my daughter was born, I stared at her tiny face and realized I had a choice. I could keep carrying my father's sins like a torch, or I could choose something better for her. I didn't want to pass on a legacy of bitterness. I didn't want her to grow up believing love had a price tag or that money equaled worth. So one rainy night, I poured myself a drink, sat at the kitchen table, and opened the envelope. Inside was a letter. Not typed, not dictated, handwritten, to my son. If you're reading this, I assume you're older now. I assume you've seen what I was and what I wasn't. I never meant to hurt you. I thought if I gave you everything, you'd never need anything. But I was wrong. I didn't give you honesty, or presence, or warmth. I built an empire to impress ghosts. My own father never believed in me. His voice haunted every decision I made. That fear drove me to greatness, but it also drove me away from you. If you're ready to forgive, or even just understand, I want you to know, everything I built was yours to inherit. But I hope you choose to build something different, love. Dad. I cried for the first time in years, not just for what he wrote, but for all the years we wasted in silence. I went back to the house one last time with my daughter. She was just old enough to ask questions. "Did Grandpa live here?" she asked, wide-eyed as we stepped into the grand foyer. "He did," I said. "Was he rich?" I smiled. He was, but he didn't know what made someone truly rich. She didn't understand, but that was okay. Someday she would. We walked through the garden. She picked flowers. I let her. She didn't know the stories rooted in the soil, the deals made on the patio, the arguments under the arbor, the phone calls that changed destinies. To her, it was just a pretty place. And for the first time, I was grateful for that. Later, I took her to the small nonprofit I started, the one that helps families rebuild after financial ruin. I introduced her to the team, people who once thought they'd never get out of debt, now teaching others how to thrive. One of them pulled me aside. "You know," he said, "you could have run with your inheritance. You could have kept the empire. Why'd you walk away?" I thought for a moment. "Because I didn't want to inherit a curse," I said. "I wanted to build a future." He nodded slowly, understanding more than I'd expected. That night, I tucked my daughter into bed. She looked up at me and asked, "Do you think Grandpa would have liked me?" I kissed her forehead. "I think he would have loved you more than anything." She smiled and closed her eyes. I sat beside her bed for a while, just listening to her breathe, thinking about everything it took to get here, about the man my father was, the man I became, and the little girl who, without even knowing it, had already broken a decades-long chain. Sometimes money buys comfort. Sometimes it buys silence. But sometimes the greatest wealth you'll ever know is the freedom to become something new. I was the bridge between the two, and sometimes bridges collapse. The note stayed folded in my wallet, pressed between old receipts and a faded train ticket from Vienna, a token from the weeks I wander, aimless but free. Every so often I'd open it, read the last line again, and wonder how different things might have been if someone in our family had chosen peace instead of power. But peace was a luxury, and in our world, luxuries came with price tags. Gloria always told me healing wasn't linear, that we'd never truly outrun the past, only choose what we passed on. And when our daughter was born, I finally understood. I looked into her eyes and saw none of the family curse, no schemes, no legacy, just potential. So I rewrote the trust, not for wealth, for purpose. Scholarships for kids like I once was, grants for programs Gloria dreamed of, and a single rule carved in stone. No heir shall inherit unless they've lived a year without money. A test, a mirror, Because if they can find meaning without fortune, maybe they'll never forget what it's really worth. And maybe, just maybe, the bridge holds.